Good morning. I did a test on this microphone a little earlier and I saw that jingle confirmed, but if for some reason you cannot hear me, if you could write in the comments, we'll get that message over to me. My name is Frankie and I'm one of our aviculturists here at the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California. And if you're tuning in, welcome. We are going to be chatting about our penguins with our curator, Brett. And before I pass the microphone on over to him, I wanted to give you a little bit of background. We have 22 Magellanic penguins within our June Keys penguin habitat, 13 of which have hatched here since we opened back in 2011. We have 3 Brazilian rescues that were stranded, deemed non-releasable in northern Brazil, Rio de Janeiro. Not fit to survive in the wild, but they were fit to survive. So we were able to take in a few birds, and now we have Kate, Robbie, and Roxy. We are going to be entering our migration season very slowly. We're entering that phase right now. In a couple of weeks, I imagine our birds will be full migration mode, but you'll see them on the deck a little bit, still ensuring their feathers are nice and waterproof. But that's a little bit of a taste of what's going on here in our June Keys penguin habitat. I'm going to pass the microphone over to Brett, and he's going to introduce himself a little bit, and then we've got some questions. If you do have any additional questions, please continue to comment on the Explore.org comment section.
Hi, thank you, Frankie. Again, hi, my name is Brett, and I am the curator of birds and mammals here at the Aquarium of the Pacific. You guys caught me on almost my 2-year anniversary. So my first day with the aquarium was on October 15th of 2018. I spent the 12 or 13 years prior to that working at the Alaska Sea Life Center up in Alaska with their bird and mammal program. And have spent the last 27, 28 years working both in the field and in aquarium and research settings with marine mammals and diving seabirds. So Frankie and I were hoping to take the opportunity today to talk a little bit about where we're at with our penguin program. And we're going to be passing the mic back and forth to each other depending on the questions. And I'll probably try to field some of the more programmatic ones. And then Frankie, certainly with her expertise on the individual birds, we can talk more specifically about that. And so Frankie, would you like to go ahead and start with some of our questions?
Yes, of course. So I'm going to take on a few questions about just the individual birds. I noticed there was a question or two about the bead bands, and we do have bead bands on all of our birds, or that's the goal anyway throughout the entire year. Males will have bands on their right side, females on their left side. And you may notice that we still have some leftover birds without bands post-molt. And really the simple answer to why they still don't have one is because if we don't need to grab a bird up to put a band on them, then we won't. It's just an added stressor. But once we get them all back on, you'll slowly see those remaining birds, which off the top of my head, we have Robbie, Roxy. That might be it. But anyway, we'll take care of all those bands once it's an opportune moment for us. All right, we do have a lot of questions about burrows, and I think I'm going to pass this question off to Brett. Earlier in the year, last year actually, we did choose to close off this burrow behind me. It's shaped a little weirdly. It caused a little bit of drama between some of our birds, and we didn't find the need to reopen it again this past season. And then as you noticed throughout our COVID closure and post-breeding, we did close the burrows. Brett, would you care to take a moment and explain why we closed, the burrows are still closed, or if there's a chance to reopening anytime soon?
Sure, Frankie, I'm happy to try to address that. And so part of taking care of animals in our collections is that we just look at our practices routinely and try to evaluate whether there's anything that we could be doing that potentially could provide either enhanced care or differences that might make long-term care easier with these animals. And so in particular with the burrows, we have a couple things that are going on. The veterinary team and the husbandry team, at least on an annual basis, review mortality reports on all of our animals here at AOP, and that simply means that we look at the reason potentially why animals have died and then try to evaluate whether there's practices that we can enhance to help us with that. And so with our penguins specifically, over the course of the last 10 years, or is it 12 years the exhibit's been open?
Yes.
Close to 12 years. Approximately 50% of the penguins that we've lost, which is actually a small number, we've lost 6 adults, had what appeared to be Astaire lesions, which are fungal lesions in their lungs that potentially contributed to their death. And Astaire, or fungus in general, often propagate or grow in wet, damp places. And so when we started to evaluate our practices to see if there were areas that we could help to eliminate those, the burrows are one of those areas. And so the burrows are certainly necessary during breeding season, and that's a part of their natural history, and the penguins come to shore and start seeking out burrows, seeking out pairs, and moving forward. But outside of the breeding season, they typically would not be hanging out in burrows out in their normal environment. And so we decided to start trying to remove some of the access to those burrows to see if we could start to work towards not having access to wet, damp places. In addition, as our population demographic changes, or as our animals' ages change, in the coming years, we're going to end up with some adolescent birds that are reaching sexual maturity, and we're probably going to see increased territoriality or increased aggression as younger birds try to figure out their place on the habitat. And so by removing the opportunity to fight over burrow space while we have these adolescent birds, then that might allow us to better manage the population and see less injuries or less problems related to aggression and territoriality. And it's really just something that we're going to try and evaluate, and we talk about it all the time. Do we feel like access is a good thing at this point in the time of the year? Do we think that reducing the access encourages the animals to go into the water more? So as an example, during migration season, we really don't want to give the birds any reason to come ashore or any reason to feel like that's the place. We'd prefer that they go and actually swim in the water, which is what we're coming onto now. Did I cover that, Frankie, or am I missing?
Yeah, I think you covered that well. I want to touch on, there were a couple of questions about mats and Roxy having access, and it kind of a little bit goes towards that burrow question as well. We have a certain amount of mats that you may have noticed over the years, over the past year, the number of mats has declined. And that's because we are analyzing how many mats or where penguins should be in their natural habitat throughout that particular time of year. So right now we are moving on into our migration season. And yes, the penguins do come on the beach. They don't have to worry about things that penguins in their natural habitat have to worry about. And those penguins off the coast of Chile and Argentina do make pit stops on the coastline. But we want to make sure that they are encouraged to be in the water and able to swim and doing their thing, and we're just testing it out. We're making sure that we can give the penguins the best that they need to move on into their next season. So of course, as the next molting season comes back around next year, we'll probably see an additional amount of mats because that's where the birds are, and we want to give them cushion and just to ensure that they're getting everything they need within our habitat. So there was a question, let's see, about a couple of birds that have been going behind the scenes, and I'm going to pass these off to Brett. We have Kate and Lily, and then actually Shim. Shim was a recent question. I'll take Shim. The question about Shim was we noticed his walking was a little bit different over the past year, and to be honest, I don't know that we've noticed anything in particular. It's something that I can keep a better eye on moving forward. But Shim actually is built a little bit differently than the rest of the birds in our habitat. You all know that he's very, very tall. And when you look at him, he kind of looks goofy. His feet are physically bigger than the rest of the birds. His apron, as we call it, the white of his apron is higher up than most of the birds because he's a taller standing bird. But also he's one of our most shy birds. So when he is getting to know a new person or getting to bringing his mental state into the next season, he's a little bit off and he's tiptoeing around to figure out, do I trust you? Do I trust you? I'm going to eat from you. Yes, I'm going to eat from you today. So personally, I think it's more of a behavioral thing that Shim is going through to get to know people and get through each season. But I will definitely keep an eye on that. It's something to look forward to. And also we have our physicals coming up every December and January, so it's something that we'll for sure take a closer look at when we have to have him restrained in a setting during his physical. But I'm going to pass off the Kate question. How is Kate? Is she being treated for avian malaria, or has she made a full recovery? And then some follow-up questions are, it seems like several penguins have been moving in the back, and after Kate will be Lily. So if you want to take on both of those birds to chat about. I'm sorry? And Roxy. Brett will touch on Kate's, Lily and Roxy for the next couple of moments.
Hi again. Okay, we're going to start with Kate. And so the short answer to the question is yes, we are treating Kate for avian malaria. So in Southern California, the mosquitoes that we have in Southern California carry 2 different strains of avian malaria. And we've been treating Kate for that over the course of the last several weeks, few months. The typical treatment that we use, it has worked well on our other penguins when they have what appears to be malaria, for whatever reason does not seem to be working on Kate, so we are going to go through another round of treatments. That's why sometimes we move her to the back so that we have a better success rate at getting all of her meds in. I don't know that all of you know this, but when you're in an outdoor environment where there are mosquitoes and the potential of malaria, you could actually choose to do preventative anti-malaria treatments. So all of our penguins every other day receive anti-malaria drugs in order to hopefully prevent them from getting that or getting malaria. During breeding season, we need to take the birds that are actually breeding off of that medication because it isn't good for the development of the embryo and the egg. And so sometimes we have a period of time that the birds are more susceptible, and we do other things to try to minimize mosquitoes in the area, make sure there isn't any standing water. But unfortunately, in this case, Kate, again, does appear to have malaria, and we are treating her for it right now. She's progressing in a positive direction. She is out on the is she in back right now? I'm losing track of my critters. She is in back right now in our back holding pool. She has access to water, and she's just going to remain there while we work through this treatment protocol so that we're confident that we can get those treatments into her. With Lily, this year, Lily developed a small bumble lesion on her foot. Fortunately, we caught it very early, and to help keep that from getting worse and more realistically to solve that is we've moved Lily back into an area and put a small bandaged boot on her foot so that it provides a little bit of extra padding on her foot. And because of that boot, she isn't allowed to have access to water because it will get waterlogged and then her foot will be wet and damp, which is not something that helps with bumblefoot lesions. And so we don't know exactly why Lily developed this year, because she has not developed it in previous years. But it's something that you have to watch for in most seabirds, penguins included. And when we notice the spot developing, we try to get ahead of it and not wait for it to become a problem or a pressure sore, and that's where Lily's at right now. So she's doing well and she's in back, but she's going to remain back there for the next couple weeks at least while we watch that small lesion heal. There were some questions about Roxy's treatment this year, and again, a lot of you know that Roxy is one of our rescue birds, and she has had problems with bumblefoot since the day that she came into our facility. That more often than not, we see it at times of the year where she spends more time on deck or on land, which happens during molt. And so in previous years, those lesions or that lesion starts to develop, and then we have had to treat that lesion. This year, instead of waiting for the lesion to develop, we proactively moved Roxy to the back and put a boot on her foot so that we could keep her from getting it. So she was in the back for about 6 weeks. She had access or did not have access to water during that time because she had the boot on, but we were very happy to note that the lesion did not develop this year. And in previous years where it's taken as long as up to 4 months to both identify, treat, and resolve that problem, this year we were able to reduce it to about 6 weeks. There were also some questions as to where she was being managed, and in this case it was in behind the scenes, right behind the penguin habitat in a dry holding area, and whether or not we put other penguins, in particular Floyd, with her at that time. And the short answer is there probably were a few opportunities that we might have had a penguin back there, but we did not bring Floyd back there. We felt that it wasn't worth adding additional stress to Floyd's day, and that the act of putting them together would not necessarily provide any stress relief for Roxy in that scenario. So it's a judgment call on those, and we have to weigh out all the time the good of the group versus the good of the individual and or the individual pairing. So that's Lily, Roxy, Kate. Were there any others that people asked specifically about?
Going
And so same answer. No, those other penguins have not been back to visit Lily. Lily is next to Kate right now. They're in two separate areas, but they have visual access to each other, and they can hear each other. You know, we have increased during COVID. Has changed a lot of things in the world, in California, and at this facility. One of the ways that we have safely found that we can increase our audience or reach out to our audience is that we have been offering COVID-friendly, safe penguin encounters every morning. And so on any given day, one or two penguins, we move to the back so that they can participate in that educational experience with a very small group of our on-site visitors. And so that would also be another reason why you're seeing more birds or more frequently going to the back on a daily basis.
Thank you. I want to touch next on our species survival plan. So I know a lot of you are familiar with what a species survival plan is, but I'm going to overview it pretty quickly. Basically, it is it's a committee that oversees the management of every single bird, in this case, every single Magellanic penguin in all of the 13 facilities within the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. So although we have 22 birds here in our June Keys penguin habitat, there are over 230 Magellanic penguins in all of the care in AZA. And because of that, we want to make sure that we are ensuring the longevity of the entire population. Well, hi, Patsy. We want to make sure that we're ensuring the longevity of the entire population. And there was a question specifically about Astaire that I'm going to ask Brett. Let me read it off to you. Let's see. The aquarium announced last fall that Astaire was being transferred to the John Ball Zoo, but thankfully Astaire is still on the beach. What happened? Does that mean that AOP, the Aquarium of the Pacific, gets to keep him? And I think there might be another couple of questions about animal management if you want to touch on that as well.
Thank you, Frankie. And so we'll start with Astaire specifically. So Frankie, that was a great explanation of what accredited zoos and aquariums species survival plans do to manage populations in our collections. And so Astaire has genetics that committee would like to share with other facilities. And so that's why John Ball Zoo was selected, because there is a female penguin at John Ball Zoo that has genetics that will pair nicely with Astaire's genetics. And so it's actually for us, although we certainly care about the individuals and we develop individual bonds and relationships, the bigger picture for us is that we want to contribute to this community of Magellanic penguins within AZA institutions. So we want Astaire to go to John Ball Zoo and participate in that program. And so the reason that Astaire is still here, and it's pretty simple to be honest, is that the pandemic and COVID has slowed down lots of facilities' opportunities to move animals. So in this case, we hope to get Astaire out to John Ball Zoo either very shortly in the next few weeks because the weather is still very suitable for moving penguins, or hopefully it will be in very early spring before breeding season, so we have an opportunity to get him out there. So he is still with us at the moment, but we will be moving him to John Ball at our, more importantly in this case, their soonest convenience. When Frankie was referring to the other sort of management decisions or population management decisions, we, at the request of the species survival plan coordinators, we allowed our specific penguins to breed to produce chicks. And those 4 or 5 adolescents now were supposed to move to another zoo. And then as a result of the pandemic and COVID, that zoo has decided to not move forward in building a new penguin habitat. And so those individuals right now will remain with us for a little longer until the species or the SSP coordinators create a new breeding and transfer plan for Magellanic penguins, and that happens every year. And my guess would be in the next few weeks, we're going to get information from that group as to potentially where some of our penguins might go, or the opposite could be that we need to be prepared to manage them for another year here. And then that'll also tell us which animals in our collection they would like us to breed or not breed. Now, the interesting part about that is that like any exhibit, it doesn't matter how big or how small that it is, has a capacity to it as to how many animals can be safely and appropriately managed on that exhibit. And this exhibit was designed probably for somewhere between 21, 22, and 25, depending on the age demographic, the sex ratios. And so this year, even if we get a recommendation to breed, if we don't have an opportunity to place some of our juvenile penguins in other facilities, we might elect to not breed this year simply because we are very near our capacity. And we don't feel that it's appropriate to add more animals to the overall population if we don't have long-term homes for them. And so we'll get back to you when we know. And I think that the important part for everybody to understand is that AOP doesn't work alone in these decisions, that we work with the other 13 holders of Magellanic penguins at accredited facilities to manage that population.
Thank you, Brett. Let's see. There were a couple of questions that I think I can answer, but if I end up needing Brett's help, I will pass the microphone. There was one about the wildfires in California. For starters, thankfully, we are in a space in Long Beach, California that isn't within 30, 35, 50 miles of any major fires, but we do see some after effect of fires. We're in a more urban city setting where there aren't as many trees, which if you know anything about California, you just go an hour, hour and a half out. There are mountains and lots of trees. What we do see in California is coverage, so sky coverage. On the bigger fires, we'll see ash. And I'm going to say that there could be some issues if we had a terrible smoke cover instance for a fire where they may develop some breathing issues. I don't think any fire we've had in the last, really ever, since we've had this penguin habitat, has been thick enough smoke that it would ultimately affect any of the penguins' breathing. But there are fires in Southern California. We are a little bit farther away from them. Brett, do you have anything to add to that?
Thanks, Frankie. I think that was great in terms of the risk that we've seen here at AOP, but sort of a bigger overarching management strategy is that we do have active contingency plans that if a natural disaster, whether it be a wildfire, an earthquake, or any other human-caused disaster, that we have to have contingency plans in place. That what would we do with our collection of animals? Some of those contingency plans is you shelter in place, depending on the type of problem. But in the case of bad air quality, or if there were fires that were close enough, or if the wind was blowing smoke into our area, we have arrangements with other facilities in Southern California that we could move many of our animals, whether it be the penguins or the shorebirds, or even up to our marine mammal collection that could be subject to that bad air quality, and move them to another facility. Likewise, AOP can be a facility that receives animals in that case. And so with the wildfires in California this year example, there were a couple facilities in Central California that were impacted by the wildfires, and they reached out to us and said, in the event that we need to evacuate, do you have the ability to take in some of our animals? And certainly we said we will do everything that we can to help you, and if it comes to that. And so this organization of zoos and aquariums work very well together, and I mean, not only is it the right thing to do to have those contingency plans, we're actually required to have them, both from the federal government that has oversight over some of our animal collections, and from the Association of Zoos and Aquariums as an accreditation process.
Thank you. That's what I meant to say. No, that was perfect. Thank you, Brett. And then another question I feel I can answer is about the great blue heron, seagulls, and other wildlife that appear on our habitat. Of course, we are watching every single bird that comes on. It's not our goal to attract seagulls and the great blue heron. We have 3 juvenile great blue herons that hang out at the Aquarium of the Pacific. They are young. They're figuring out life. We are, in a sense, happy that they're here and not physically hurting any of our animals. Everyone is fine. The penguins can also hold their own against all of these birds. But if we had to have a great blue heron, we have other outdoor habitats here, and there are chances where they could eat fish or other rays or other fish in other tanks So if they're here and not bothering the penguins, we're actually okay with it. It's an opportunity for that great blue heron not to be bothering another habitat. Of course, we're watching it. Yes, we are fully aware of any diseases that could be transmitted. And our birds, on top of their anti-malarial, they get annual West Nile virus. And as you know, we all know every single one of our penguins' personalities, and we know if something is up, and we'll be able to catch on pretty quickly. We have not had any issues with the great blue heron. Or another change you may have seen recently is that we've been leaving toys on the habitat a little bit longer. As Brett mentioned a few moments ago, we have been having our daily encounters, our COVID-safe animal encounters every morning. And because of that, we've had to introduce, we've gotten to introduce new penguins to the encounter experience, some older birds that had stopped doing encounters. We're getting them interested in doing that again, and one of the ways that we've been doing that is by using the toys, so the dog toys and the car and the floating egg and sometimes neoprene. And one of the fun things for guests to do is to just throw the toys back into the habitat so they can watch all of the other penguins interact with the toys. So you've been noticing toys in the water a little bit more, and that's just because we've had more opportunity to give those toys to the birds. And I've even seen the seagulls go after the toy, which at that point we will sanitize everything. Everything gets sanitized as frequently as it gets taken out of the water. We're pretty aware and alert of all of the animals and what's going on in the water. And thankfully we haven't had things like pennies or small metals or anything like that get thrown into the habitat, because as you know, in the past we've had birds ingest those smaller items. So just going back to really understanding and knowing all of the animals' personalities, we are so grateful and thankful to be able to know 22 of these birds individually, so that we can sense it. We know if something's up, if they're walking a little bit differently, if they're on deck a little more, if there's a visual thing, if there's been a fight. We can see those small scrapes. They bounce back pretty quickly, especially if we can catch that stuff really early on. I think there was one more question, which I know Brett touched on it, but maybe if you could touch a little bit more, because I know that your job isn't just penguins. What does your job as a curator involve?
Wow. What does my job as a curator involve? And so, ultimately, my job has the responsibility for ensuring that the animals that are under the bird and mammal team's care are provided with all of the things that they need to thrive. And more of my time is probably spent just getting to work with the staff and making sure the staff have all the things they need so that they can carry out that sort of mission for birds and mammals here at the aquarium. And so, I can be a little more hands-on maybe than some people, and I don't like spending as much time behind a desk as I probably should spend at times. And our current response to this pandemic has given me an opportunity to be out with the staff a little bit more and be more hands-on. So being a curator to me is sort of all-encompassing. I mean, you're there to be a resource and a support system for your colleagues and the staff that you work with, and then hopefully provide some guidance and thought processes that help us always to try to reevaluate where we're at and always to be progressive and moving forward. You tell me, Frankie, what is a curator supposed to do?
I think in my eyes, when I see Brett, he's very involved on all levels of the animals. So he's not only overseeing our bird department, which is our penguins, shorebirds, diving birds. We have some terrestrial animals like lorikeets, small mammals, reptiles, but he also has a large background and oversees our marine mammals, so our pinnipeds, sea otters, and seals. But even outside of that, he's here to support the team and ensuring that we are getting all of the tools and resources that we need to move through our day, allowing us to feel as educated as we need to and getting extra opportunities and experiences just to build our own personal resume, just internally as a team. So really, Brett is here helping us stay involved, stay informed, and allowing us resources that maybe sometimes for myself, it's hard for myself to get alone. But I think that was the very last question. So I think on that note, unless I have anything...
One more to add.
Oh, Brett has one to add before we wrap up.
This is more of a generalized statement. And so Frankie and I were having a conversation this morning about communication and information transfer. And we certainly want to make sure that our explore.org visitors and audience remain informed in what we're doing. And we're trying to figure out ways that we could help with that a little bit more. One of the limitations that we're under currently in our COVID operating structure is that although our outside areas are open to the public, they're at reduced, we can only go to 25% capacity in Los Angeles County right now in those outdoor activities or outdoor spaces. And we also have to do everything we can to ensure that people are appropriately physically distancing while they're here. And one of the challenges, or it's not a challenge, but when we sit down with a microphone, for example, at the penguin habitat, and we start talking to our guests to tell them what we're doing, how we're feeding them, how the penguins are doing, as you can imagine, that draws a crowd. And so we've actually had to, unfortunately, stop using the microphone while we're doing our feeding sessions, because at this point, our goal is to not draw crowds. It's to make sure that we're providing appropriate care for the animals and then allowing the visiting public to come and visit us in a very safe manner. And so Frankie and I talked about this some, and we're going to try to, especially as we get towards the California winter, I'm still not used to those, calling it a winter, but that we might look for some opportunities where our outside attendance has less numbers, and then take advantage of that as an opportunity to get on mic so that we can communicate that to our off-site guests. But we really appreciate your patience, and I know that Frankie, she excels, loves being up here talking about the animals that she cares for, and I don't think that it's a chore for her to share that experience with people. It's been, unfortunately, the management, including myself, that has said, hey, for a while we don't get to share as much because it draws crowds. And so hopefully we'll find a way to address that and make sure that again, we're passing that information. But thanks again for just being patient with us and understanding as we sort of redevelop our operating procedures as a result of some of the overriding regulations that we have to fit now.
Thank you, Brett. That's a wonderful point to end on. Stay tuned for any future announcements or planned scheduled chats. With that, I want to thank you all so much for tuning in. I think this worked out really nicely. Our marketing gal was able to send us questions, and we were able to answer. We're always keeping an eye on the explore.org questions, and we do try to address anything if you feel strongly or feel the need to ask. So with that, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you out on the deck feeding sometime soon.